This is a tale from ages grim and late, so chilling, seared by the claws of fate. Within the castle torn by fire and ice, bonded beasts ravaged on fallen knights. Yet the dragons spared their savagery for challengers who soared in harmony. This is a story of coasters surrendered, dueling dragons at Universal Islands of Adventure. Chapter 1: Origins.
The story of Dueling Dragons had as many twists and turns as the fateful coaster itself. Its origins date back to the 1990s when the standalone Universal Studios Florida theme park evolved into a multi-day vacation destination. Universal Orlando's 650-acre expansion was a significant transformation with hotels, an entertainment district, and most importantly, a second gate. However, Universal Orlando was taking a new approach with its next theme park. Instead of another theme park in the style of a movie studio backlot, the second gate would be an immersive escape into fantasy with highly themed lands and high-tech attractions. Universal Orlando in the past created cinematic dark rides, but its upcoming theme park would have a lineup of story-driven thrill attractions, including a new type of ride for the company: roller coasters. In its early plans, Universal Orlando had a tentative licensing agreement with Warner Bros. To build lands and attractions based on properties such as Looney Tunes and DC Comics. One such attraction was a pair of dueling suspended roller coasters in Gotham City, putting riders in a skyward scrap between Batman and the Penguin. Reportedly, Warner Bros. Pulled out of the project. Thus, Universal no longer had the rights to Warner Bros. Properties. MCA Planning and Development, now known as Universal Creative, adjusted its plans for the theme park, which became Islands of Adventure. The park recovered with a few replacement intellectual properties such as Marvel Comics. Rumors suggest Universal explored the idea of using its own classic Monsters series in the park as well. However, in place of the classic Monsters idea, Universal dedicated a land to public domain concepts. This island, known as the Lost Continent, was based on ancient myths and legends from Grecian, Arabic, and European cultures. The Lost Continent show producer Amelia Gordon described the public domain theme as a quote-unquote wonderful palette of freedom, as opposed to the stricter world of intellectual properties. The Lost Continent would feature a sub-area called Merlinwood, themed to the Middle Ages. Merlinwood took inspiration from classic Arthurian legends, particularly the tale of Merlin and Nimue, with light influences from The Once and Future King by 20th century author T.H. White. For Merlinwood in the Lost Continent, Universal revisited an old ride idea that was far from lost: a dueling suspended roller coaster. On the creative side, the concept was reimagined to fit the Arthurian theme of Merlinwood. Instead of the aforementioned Batman concept, the pair of suspended coasters was reworked to have a medieval dragon theme. Riders would take courage by riding on the backs of two flying dueling dragons.
Dragons and roller coasters. It's a perfect combination.
Over time, the theme park community has speculated some attractions and concepts for the Lost Continent were lifted from a cancelled Disney project. During the production of Islands of Adventure, Walt Disney World was developing a brand new park in Orlando, Disney's Animal Kingdom. The park was planned to have a section called Beastly Kingdom, themed to mythological creatures. The e-ticket attraction of Beastly Kingdom was going to be a suspended roller coaster called Dragon's Tower, an experience in that guests would soar through a crumbling castle ruled by a treasure-obsessed, fire-breathing dragon. As Animal Kingdom's budget tightened up, Beastly Kingdom was cancelled, never to be built. Some Imagineers who worked on the project were laid off after budget cuts and found work across town at Universal. If the rumors are to be believed, those former Imagineers supposedly took ideas from the cancelled Beastly Kingdom and helped design the Lost Continent. However, important details of this claim have not been verified. development for the Lost Continent was possibly underway before the former Imagineers joined the Islands of Adventure project. The concept of Disney's dragon-themed roller coaster attraction had broad similarities to Universal's plans, but it was not an entirely far-fetched idea. Universal's creatives likely could have imagined the concept of a dragon roller coaster without any knowledge of Beastly Kingdom. Also, Universal's upcoming Dragon roller coaster was not an indoor attraction and had 2 dueling tracks, unlike Disney's concept. Regardless, Universal Creative workshopped the twin inverted roller coasters under the name Merlin's Dueling Dragons, using the British English spelling, but later simplified it to Dueling Dragons with a single L. Dueling Dragons was going to be more than a thrill ride. It was going to be a never-before-attempted themed engineering project, standing out not only in Universal Orlando's second gate, but across the entire theme park industry. Islands of Adventure's Vice President of Design and Creative Development, Mark Woodbury, was enthusiastic, saying, quote, "We set out to redefine the roller coaster experience," unquote. Thematically, the queue of Dueling Dragons was set to take place in the battered castle of Merlinwood Forest, which had been overtaken by 2 fierce dragons, Fire and Ice. In the castle's early concepts, guests waiting in line would have seen treasure, dragon shadow effects, as well as fire and ice features made possible by water projection effects. These scenes were cut for budget reasons, but the attraction overall was progressing as a creative and engineering work of art. Developing dual suspended coasters was going to be a challenge, but the process would be worth it. The concept of a suspended roller coaster had been tried before, but without lasting success. In the late 70s, the long-standing Aero development engineered a prototype roller coaster with swinging carriages mounted beneath the track. The original concept included inversions, but those proved to be unworkable and were removed. The design became the basis for the first permanent modern suspended coaster. Its initial installation in 1981, the Bat at Ohio's Kings Island, operated for only a few problematic seasons before its removal due to engineering shortcomings. The coaster model was not yet feasible at that point, but by the 90s, an emerging coaster manufacturer flipped the industry upside down. Universal commissioned the up-and-coming Bolliger & Mabillard to manufacture its dual inverted roller coasters. B&M's state-of-the-art manufacturing produced smooth yet intense roller coasters, which were quickly in high demand across the theme park industry. The Swiss firm's production schedule was booked out years in advance, so Universal secured a spot even before sorting out the ride details. All Universal knew for sure was they wanted B&M roller coasters at the second gate. Despite having a young portfolio, B&M had produced a number of innovative designs, particularly its inverted model. In 1992, a first-of-its-kind B&M inverted coaster, Batman the Ride, debuted at Chicago's Six Flags Great America. Universal Orlando would soon debut its own pair of B&M inverted coasters with Double the Thrills. 2 world-class B&M inverts would be intertwined for one intense experience. The idea of twin roller coasters had been around for a while, with classics like Kennywood's Racer leading the way, but Universal's creatives had a new vision for the gimmick. Unlike past racing roller coasters with matching tracks, these dueling coasters would innovate with 2 opposing interlacing layouts, along the lines of Six Flags Great Adventure's new Batman and Robin the Chiller. Between the engineering prowess of B&M and the creative backing of Universal, the $20 million Dueling Dragons was going to have 2 differing tracks, with 3 thrilling near-miss elements. The designers of Dueling Dragons took advantage of the open B&M inverted train design, which riders' legs dangled freely below the seats. The distance between the coaster's near-miss elements were minimized while still having a safe reach envelope, bringing the feet of riders as close as 1.5 feet apart. Theoretically, if the 2 tallest possible riders sat in opposite trains, their shoes could be as little as 18 inches from each other at certain moments. The unique track layouts were carefully engineered so the trains approached each near-miss element simultaneously. The precise timing was not a work of wizardry from Merlin himself, but the result of a system that weighed both trains to calculate the expected momentum as to adjust their individual lift hill speed and release, which optimized the synchronization through the near-miss elements. The near-miss concept even worried some of the ride's engineers during maiden test rides. A few nervously doubted the near-miss elements, but of course, it was as thrilling and safe as designed. Those close call moments were key selling points for Dueling Dragons, especially for thrill seekers, but its theming was just as intense as the coaster. Dueling Dragons was becoming the flagship attraction of the Lost Continent, and as such, needed an impressive entrance area to make a striking first impression. Universal partnered with Adirondack Scenic to create a dynamic pair of dragon sculptures. The team drafted the statues as maquettes and digitized those designs to engineer the steel frames, fabricated to withstand 120-mile-per-hour winds against Florida's seasonal hurricane conditions. Craftspeople added carved spray foam to the structures, then coating it with cement. The sculptures were painted and aged in icy cobalt and fiery carnelian colors like mineral formations. The base coaster trains were B&M's standard design, but to add some dragon theming, Universal hired Kern Studios, a firm best known for producing Mardi Gras floats. The dragon designs were sculpted out of fiberglass with fierce eyes, scales, and claws to disguise the coaster trains as beasts. To go along with the dragon-themed trains, the tracks were designed to mimic the sensation of flying. To accomplish this, the track pieces were filled with pea gravel, which dampened the typical roar of a roller coaster to sound like gliding through air. Construction on Dueling Dragons was moving along as the park's opening day neared. Dueling Dragons was prominently featured in Islands of Adventure's preview center and other promotional material. It was a highly anticipated attraction at the brand new park and didn't disappoint during sneak previews. However, during the coaster's testing and preview periods, nearby residents complained about the attraction's disruptive noise level. In response, Universal constructed a 55-foot tall sound barrier wall in April 1999 around the perimeter edge of the twin coasters. Guests could soon live the adventure at Universal Orlando's newest park and duel with dragons in the Lost Continent. As we dive deeper into Dueling Dragons, thanks for watching so far. Make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this in the future.
Chapter 2: Rain.
Dueling Dragons debuted alongside the grand opening of Universal Islands of Adventure on May 28, 1999. To ride Dueling Dragons, guests trekked to the back of the park by passing the towering Pharos Lighthouse, through the welcoming Port of Entry Village, and toward the Lost Continent. This island was a distant retreat from civilization, a place where guests could discover magical stories of awe and wonder. The Lost Continent was split up into 3 subsections. The first was the Lost City, a crumbling Grecian galleria featuring the Poseidon's Fury walkthrough attraction. Next door was Sindbad's Bazaar, a desert village lost in the sands of time, presenting the 8th voyage of Sindbad's stunt show. And around the bend was the medieval town of Merlinwood. The pathways of Merlinwood were cloaked with a Celtic soundtrack, which the park-wide audio media producer John Rust described as, quote, happy but on a bed of uneasiness, unquote. The timeless town branched toward a hollowed tree sprawling with tangled roots, and a trunk covered in rough bark, which was splintering in the shape of a mysterious face. According to legend, that wrinkled face was that of the once great wizard, Merlin. He was enchanted and betrayed by the Lady of the Lake, Nimue, who entrapped him in the tree. Inside the trunk, guests could grab a drink or a bite to eat at the Enchanted Oak Tavern and Alchemy Bar. A Merlin walk-around character could be spotted around Merlinwood, with a robe covered in leaves and vines as a connection to the Enchanted Oak. Across the way, guests would discover 2 dragon statues in a heated battle frozen in time. This was the grand entrance for Dueling Dragons. The statues were spectacular in scale and detail, as the snarling dragons wrapped around 2 collapsing columns, one topped with a glowing ice crystal, and the other capped with a flame. At a marked spot on Merlinwood's main midway, guests could look in between the dragon statues for a perfect view of the dueling coaster's signature near-miss elements lined up in one vantage point.
Sire, no! No, please, heed my warning! The knights have gone before you! Their remains are strewn throughout the castle! This is not the time to go, my lord, please!
Guests entered the queue for Dueling Dragons by stepping up a small stairway between the dragon statues and into the forest. The soundtrack shifted from bouncy to dramatic through the woods, with sporadic signposts to warn travelers about dragons. The exterior queue passed by the coaster area where dragons raced by. The pathway led past an outdoor extended queue area, across a bridge, and toward a dilapidated castle. Once through the portcullis and through a burst in the wall, guests entered the crumbling castle. The attraction's story unfolded in the foyer where the pre-show played across 3 animated stained glass windows. The voice of Merlin told a tale about the rundown fortress and its cherished past. Merlin retreated to the beautiful castle to nobly live out the winter of his life. That was until 2 violent dragons burning with hatred for each other dueled across the land, destroying the kingdom and its army. The twin beasts and their opposing powers of fire and ice joined forces only when challengers tried to fight back. Those foolishly brave to face the dragons were either mauled or scared away. The kingdom was powerless against the beast, known as Pyrock and Blizzrock, and its only remaining hope was the once powerful sorcerer Merlin. That was where the story left off. Merlin's withering magic was no match against the vicious dragons. All he had left to offer were grim warnings about the dangers ahead. However, as merciless as the dragons were, they spared anyone brave enough to take flight along their wings. The only escape and way to save the kingdom was to fly with Dueling Dragons. The pre-show was only the beginning of the attraction's creative storytelling and design. This indoor queue was considered among the best in the park with its eerie scenes and storytelling. Some newspaper columnists actually recommended guests tour the queue even if they had no interest in riding. The theming was that spectacular. The queue continued into the ruined castle, the one from the tale told in the pre-show. The next room was a small rotunda tower. Merlin's spellbook was on display in the center, open to a page of his past sorcery in attempt to defeat the dragons. The tower gave way to a cracked and dilapidated chamber lined with the charred remains of Pyrock's victims pinned to the fractured walls. Clever warning messages were etched in stone as guests wandered closer to the dragon's hideaway in the catacombs. The corridor rounded into a chilling room known as the Hall of the Dead. The icicle-covered armor of frozen knights hung in the decaying rafters as dim candles led the way. Tapestries on the wall added to the story of the dragons and castle. The environment grew more ominous with every step. Ambient details such as distant dragon growls caused the collection of candles to flicker. Guests passed through a small sitting parlor reduced to rubble by the tails of the dragons. The smashed opening gave way to hidden passageways toward the castle's catacombs. The queue narrowed into a series of cavernous halls textured with bones and grim messages. This dungeon-like area was just as spine-chilling as a haunted house, with its claustrophobic spaces, low lighting, terrifying sets, and hauntingly atmospheric sound design, such as rumbling winds as if the walls were breathing. The attraction's creative director, Catherine Jean, described the darker parts of the queue were, quote, sculpted to feel like you had touched the skin of the dragon, unquote. Along the passageways, sets of wooden doors made it seem as if the dragons were just on the other side, eager to barge through. Torches and lanterns led guests down the gloomy tunnels that routed to the basement where the dragons were burrowed. A brief break in the caverns opened up to a frightful chamber, where the voice of Merlin called out words of warning once again as the room funneled back into one more catacomb. The final stretch was all the more mangled as guests neared the dragon's lair. The caverns emptied to a point of no return, where guests were faced with a choice. A sign reading "Choose Thy Fate" pointed riders either left or right down the split path. Guests could choose left to ride the fire dragon or right for ice. Each side led into a slight hallway and into the attraction's dual loading station, where the coaster tracks were positioned at a 90-degree angle. Above the room's archways, guests could see silhouettes of dragons soaring, projected onto a decorative cloth drop ceiling. Before guests could load, empty ride vehicles pulled into the station. The attraction had a total of 6 trains, 3 per track, holding 32 passengers each with 4 riders to a row. The lead trains were stylized as ferocious dragon faces with pink over-the-shoulder restraints across the front rows to look like open mouths and tongues. The other rows had claws gripping the seats with tan or blue harnesses that matched either dragon. Guest boarded and the 2 coaster sides dispatched at the same time for an airborne battle. The 2 tracks paired side by side on the pre-lift straightaway, which was the system used to measure the train's individual weights and expected momentum. The coasters then ascended the 125-foot shared variable speed lift hill that released the trains at calculated times to ensure the near-miss elements would line up. The coaster area was not as heavily themed as the queue, but had some greenery, the castle's exterior, and a body of water. The pond was originally intended to be in the shape of a dragon, but was altered for logistical reasons. Atop the lift, the dragons plunged into action, splitting off into their banked drops. The fireside curved into a 105-foot drop, reaching nearly 60 miles per hour, as ice had a slightly shallower drop of 95 feet for a speed of 55 miles per hour. Fire then raced into an Immelman inversion, while ice flew into a turnaround. The 2 tracks crossed paths for their first of 3 near-miss elements. Ice snapped into a 0G roll, as fire leaped over with an airtime hill, which was a rare element for an inverted coaster. The dragons dashed away from each other. Fire blazed into another Immelman, which wrapped around into a downward helix, while ice scraped just inches away from the scuffed castle wall through a forceful cobra roll inversion. Fire and ice zoomed toward each other on a collision course across straight tracks until rising into the ride's second near-miss element, and arguably its most prominent, dual vertical loops. Riders went toe-to-toe with the other train as these 2 vertical loops swooped against each other. Scattering their separate ways, the dragons turned around to face each other, barreling into the coaster's final interactive element, 2 interlocking corkscrews. Fire drifted into one more corkscrew as ice breezed through a few turns. After more than 6,000 feet of combined track, the coasters hit their brake runs and re-entered the castle. Guests got off at a dedicated unload platform and headed down an exit path, which had a shortcut back into the main queue for anyone who wanted to re-ride. Guests could take home some Dueling Dragons souvenirs at a gift shop called the Dragon's Keep. Dueling Dragons was a novelty but stood out as a highlight at Islands of Adventure. The attraction received high praise, consistently earning a top 25 spot in the Golden Ticket Awards' Best Steel Coaster category. Dwayne Bevel of the Orlando Sentinel commented on the coaster's creative dual design, writing, quote, "Intertwined is an understatement," unquote. The twin coasters were among the park's more popular attractions upon opening. Because Universal expected large crowds and high wait times, the line for Dueling Dragons was well over half a mile long, which was the world's longest queue according to the park. Operationally, Dueling Dragons had an extraordinarily high theoretical capacity of just under 3,000 riders per hour, but usually could accommodate up to about 2,000 riders in an hour. Still, the attraction essentially had one queue for 2 separate coasters. Double the capacity, but not necessarily double the demand. On top of this, attendance at Islands of Adventure fell short in its opening year due to poor marketing. Combining that with the efficient throughput of Dueling Dragons, its wait times were lower than anticipated, making the lengthy queue excessive despite the ride's popularity. Meanwhile, early guest feedback about Islands of Adventure suggested the park could benefit from more family-friendly attractions. As such, Universal Orlando invested in 2 small family attractions to add to its new park, one for Marvel's Superhero Island and the other in the Lost Continent. A portion of the outdoor extended queue for Dueling Dragons was repurposed to give the Lost Continent a family-friendly ride, a new junior roller coaster called Flying Unicorn. This coaster opened in 2000, 1 year after the park opened, and had a storyline based around Merlin and a magical unicorn horn. The lore around Merlinwood and Dueling Dragons had potential, making it a strong concept for Universal Orlando's annual haunt event, Halloween Horror Nights. During the event in 2003, a loose extension of Dueling Dragons took over the pathways of Merlinwood. The scare zone, called Immortal Island, featured the Ice Queen, Fire King, as well as their armies of ice and fire demons. During the early era of Islands of Adventure, Dueling Dragons soared as a flagship thrill ride. The coasters were a hit with guests and had occasional light pop culture cameos, such as being in the smash hit blockbuster modern-day classic everyone's favorite, Bring It On, In It to Win It. However, Universal Orlando had an opportunity to transform its parks forever by trading one wizard, Merlin, for another, Harry Potter.
Chapter 3: Overthrown.
In mid-2007, Universal Orlando announced the Wizarding World of Harry Potter would be coming soon to Islands of Adventure. This massive turning point for Universal Orlando would come at a cost. The upcoming 20-acre land had all new themed experiences in development, but to make room, the Merlinwood portion of the Lost Continent was set to shut down permanently. Early concept art for the Harry Potter land presented familiar landmarks from the original Lost Continent area, including the Enchanted Oak Tavern and, more notably, the Dueling Dragons entrance. As the plans were refined, however, the Wizarding World evolved into a much more customized project. And yet, some of Merlinwood's attractions would carry over and be reimagined for the future Potterland. Scott Trowbridge, the vice president of Universal's creative studios, hinted Merlinwood's replacement would, quote, leverage some existing infrastructure, unquote. The Dueling Dragons roller coasters were still a part of the park's future, but its thematic elements were going to be retired in favor of new Wizarding World designs. The attraction's castle-themed queue space was being repurposed to match the Harry Potter franchise. Dueling Dragons continued its operation as construction began on the magical overhaul. The Merlinwood theme was stripped away, and the days of Dueling Dragons were numbered as the Dragon's Keep gift shop closed in July 2008. By September 2008, the attraction's entrance was temporarily relocated to the park's Jurassic Park area near the Watering Hole restaurant. This entry directed guests across the Jurassic Park Bridge, between construction walls, and toward the queue for Dueling Dragons. Unlike the attention-grabbing dragon statues of the original entrance, the interim version simply made use of the old flying unicorn sign with the Dueling Dragons logo printed on it. The attraction's entrance would never be the same again, as the classic Dueling Dragon statues were demolished in late 2008. Dueling Dragons was retired later on to be converted into a Potter attraction, never to be the same again. On June 18, 2010, the Wizarding World of Harry Potter Hogsmeade opened to the public. Substantial crowds crammed into Hogsmeade to enjoy the area's 3 rides: the brand new Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, Flight of the Hippogriff, formerly Flying Unicorn, and Dragon Challenge, formerly Dueling Dragons. The twin coasters, now under Harry Potter theming, were based around the story of the Triwizard Tournament as told in the series' 4th book and movie, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. The stone facade of Dragon Challenge featured its name etched above the archway, school pennants mounted along the wall, and a small recess displaying the first of the attraction's 4 golden eggs, part of the Triwizard Tournament storyline. This entrance was more subtle than the former dragon statues and mostly hid the steel coaster tracks. Guests journeyed into the queue, which had nearly the same layout as the previous version, as the path led through a light forest decorated with Triwizard Tournament banners. John Williams' elegant Harry Potter melodies played through this area. The outdoor queue offered a picture-perfect view of Hogwarts Castle through a break in the trees, and continued toward Hagrid's hut as well as a grounded Ford Anglia. A bridge, now decorated with pennants above, took guests toward the seasoned castle covered in vines. A banner reading "Welcome Triwizard Champions" hung over the castle's doorway, which was statelier than the ruptured entrance from the Dueling Dragons days. Immediately inside, guests walked into the former Dueling Dragons stained glass pre-show room, which was transformed into a waiting tent area for the Triwizard Tournament, displaying the Goblet of Fire. Guests with express passes would go right, and the regular standby queue continued left. The queue entered the castle's interior down a short hallway and into a rotunda that looped around a Triwizard Cup where Merlin's spellbook was once on display. a mysterious soundtrack resounded through the dim castle, through another hallway, and around a small queue area, the former resting spot of the Fire Dragon's victims. Guest passed by a display case that held the remaining 3 golden dragon eggs, as the music calmly echoed off the ageless castle walls. The passageways opened into a corridor with floating candles like a shimmery night sky in the dark rafters, which used to hold Blizzrock's ice-covered victims. The shadowy walls were decorated with elaborately woven tapestries, remnants from Dueling Dragons. The queue condensed into faintly lit caverns like before, but the skeleton set pieces in these passageways were removed, leaving behind some cavities in the walls where decorations used to be. The meandering caves were stripped down to their rocky texture, and the most interesting scenery in this stretch of the queue was a set of wooden doors from which aggressive dragon growls boomed. The lantern-lit tunnels ended up at a familiar intersection, the old Choose Thy Fate room. In this version, Ministry of Magic signage pointed riders either left for red or right for blue, now called Chinese Fireball and Hungarian Horntail respectively. The left and right paths each led to their mirrored loading stations. Dragon projections still soared above while guests waited for the coasters. While the queue for Dragon Challenge was noticeably different than the previous version, the coaster experience hadn't changed much. The train designs, track layout, and defining dueling moments were all the same. However, the attraction would soon take a bad turn.
Chapter 4: Demise.
The coasters at this point had been operating for more than a decade, and about 50 million riders enjoyed the attraction since its opening back in 1999. Up until then, the only publicly reported incidents involving the attraction were minor injuries that may occur on a roller coaster, such as shortness of breath or back pain. In fact, a Universal Orlando spokesperson assured the park was, quote, obsessive about safety and Dragon Challenge was a safe attraction, unquote. However, 2 significant loose article-related incidents occurred within a 2-week span on Dragon Challenge's near-miss elements in the summer of 2011. As a note, a Universal Orlando spokesperson at the time declined to clarify or speculate the cause of the incidents. One incident resulted in a rider losing their right eye due to loose articles, according to the guest's lawyer. The park initially reported the injury as eye discomfort in a report to the state. In an unrelated incident soon after, another rider was struck on the foot, arm, and face by loose articles. The attraction had no publicly reported incidents related to loose articles in its first 10+ years of operation, although the guest lawyer claimed to have learned about prior non-public incidents involving loose articles on the attraction. Universal Orlando reacted quickly by performing safety inspections on Dragon Challenge. A thorough review by park officials determined, quote, the ride did not play a role in these incidents, unquote. Thus, the ride continued operations, temporarily suspending its dueling feature as of August 2011. The 2 tracks would operate independently with staggered dispatches, so the trains would not interact during near-miss elements. The temporary adjustment was made permanent as Universal Orlando inevitably canceled the dueling operations of Dragon Challenge. The 2 coasters were still functional and open alongside each other, but no longer in sync. The trains went up their shared lift hill at separate intervals and went through the layout at alternating times, more like a distant chase than a near-miss duel. The dueling highlights, which once pushed the boundaries of roller coaster engineering, performed for only about a decade. Leaving its claim to fame in the past, the roller coaster was becoming a shell of its former self. Dragon Challenge or Dueling Dragons without dueling would be like Jurassic Park without dinosaurs. By the mid-2010s, Dragon Challenge introduced a strict no loose articles mandatory locker policy as riders were required to pass through metal detectors located in the extended queue. This precautionary procedure was added to Universal Orlando's other major coasters as well. Even with the strict policies, Dragon Challenge never dueled again. Dragon Challenge remained open for some time with moderate popularity, which had been waning since the park's early years and operational updates. The coasters, being part of the Wizarding World, had a high thrill level that was not highly accessible nor overly appealing for many families and groups visiting for Potter. As two high-capacity roller coasters with declining ridership numbers, Dragon Challenge generally had exceedingly low wait times. The coasters were solid on their own, but not as captivating without the novelty of dueling, which once elevated the ride experience. Now, the attraction had two coaster tracks that just so happened to be next to each other, but no longer interacted. Something was clearly missing from the ride as riders zoomed by an empty coaster track. Dragon Challenge lost its innovative qualities that separated it from similar thrill coasters at regional amusement parks. Also, the attraction clearly wasn't originally designed for Potter. Universal replicated its Hogsmeade area and attractions across its parks worldwide, with one notable exception. Dragon Challenge was never duplicated in another Wizarding World. As for the quality, the queue of Dragon Challenge didn't quite match the magic of the neighboring Hogwarts castle, nor the level of detail from the former Dueling Dragons. Outside, the steel coaster tracks took away from the movie-quality environment of Hogsmeade. Across the park, the incredible Hulk coaster closed in 2015 to be completely retracked after 16 years of operation. Considering the Hulk coaster and Dueling Dragons debuted together in 1999, the tracks on Dragon Challenge were presumably nearing the end of their service lives. The coasters were becoming less popular and aging. Actually, One Direction at the height of their popularity rode Dragon Challenge. Surely that would revive the coaster's reputation. Well, fate was approaching for Dragon Challenge. For decades, riders chose either the red track or the blue track, but this time, park management were the ones who had to make a choice. Universal Orlando was likely faced with a decision behind closed doors to either retrack Dragon Challenge, which would be a massive investment for a ride past its prime, or replace it with an all-new Wizarding World attraction. Dragon Challenge took up a large footprint in Universal Orlando's most valuable area. From a business perspective, that prime real estate would be better used for a premium attraction. The coasters were no longer in the park's long-term plans. Universal explored potential replacements for Dragon Challenge. One early consideration, as seen in some pre-concept art, was a family-friendly inverted roller coaster, likely produced by Mock Rides. This ride system had a versatile powered design, allowing for dark ride-style functions such as sudden stops, accelerations, and rotating gondolas. The possible Dragon Challenge replacement was becoming a highly themed, story-driven attraction. The Blue Sky ride concepts had connections to the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them series. Guests would have entered the queue through an underground cave or overgrown tree root system, leading to the Forbidden Forest filled with magical creatures such as Floopers and Nifflers. The proposed ride ideas made use of the existing castle building, possibly remodeled as Newt Scamander's study, including books, creatures, and interactive elements. The queue would have continued to a lower level with more frightening creatures and a pre-show just before the loading station. The inverted coaster version of the concept had a number of options for the ride vehicle, including a subway car or magical creature designs. On the coaster, riders would have seen grand magical creatures, as one pre-concept show scene pictured what appeared to be Newt Scamander alongside a Niffler taming an assumed Graphorn. A standard sit-down coaster was also on the table, with ride vehicles inspired by magical creatures or the flying Ford Anglia. The concept was shifted back to the main Potter series, being refined with possible Hagrid-sized brooms and sidecar ride vehicles. Although Dragon Challenge, formerly Dueling Dragons, meant so much to Islands of Adventure for so many years, the options for its possible replacement were promising. The concepts were a clear improvement considering the recent state of the dual coasters, so Universal Creative got to work finalizing the new attraction to take over the Dragons. Rumors were circulating in 2016 about Dragon Challenge being on the chopping block. Universal Orlando Resort broke the news in mid-2017 that Dragon Challenge would permanently close later that summer. The coasters stood among Islands of Adventure's headlining attractions for the better part of 2 decades, once being a spark for an innovative park, now becoming a cold trace of what was a fervent flame. On its final day, September 4th, 2017, Dragon Challenge pulled in longer waits than typical as fans lined up for their final chance to take flight. Unfortunately, the coasters were delayed through the afternoon due to inclement weather. Dragon Challenge was unavailable during its final moments as the park closed that day. Passionate guests, despite missing out on final rides to end the evening, gathered around the attraction's entrance for an unofficial closing ceremony. One fan, wearing a vintage Dueling Dragons t-shirt, quoted its old pre-show script, honoring Merlin and the attraction's original storyline. As the ride closed for good, the coasters met their fate. Following its closure, theme park fans and enthusiasts speculated whether the coaster tracks would be sold, disassembled, and relocated to another park outside the Universal chain. Those hopes and rumors were short-lived, as the tracks were completely destroyed, making Dueling Dragons the first B&M coaster to be entirely scrapped and defunct. Also, it was the first major opening day attraction to close at Islands of Adventure in its 18 years of operation. Any ride taking the place of such a beloved, legendary attraction had to be a meaningful, worthwhile upgrade. In the retirement announcement for Dragon Challenge, the park teased a new category redefining thrill ride coming to the Wizarding World. Universal began building that highly anticipated ride on the former Dragon Challenge site, developing what was reportedly the world's most expensive roller coaster at the time, estimated at $300 million. By June 2019, the all-new Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure debuted, and it quickly proved to be more than just a replacement for Dragon Challenge. Its record-breaking 7 launches, top speed of 50 miles per hour, and uniquely story-driven elements instantly made the new coaster among the world's top attractions. Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure was designed to be a more family-friendly coaster than Dragon Challenge, allowing a wider demographic of parkgoers to enjoy it. It has consistently been among the busiest and more beneficial attractions at Universal Orlando, making it a perfect fit for Hogsmeade and a worthy replacement for Dragon Challenge, as sad as that closure was for fans.
Chapter 5: Legacy.
Though no longer standing, Dueling Dragons is remembered through a few tributes found throughout the resort. The queue of Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure repurposed the old castle building. Its floor plan is similar to the same Dueling Dragons queue guests explored in 1999, but now remodeled as ruins on the grounds of Hogwarts. Just inside the ruins, a mural honors the retired coasters as a blue dragon and a red dragon face off with the words Dueling Club painted between them. The former dragon attraction has been remembered in other ways. An old dragon trainer outfit can sometimes be spotted hanging on a clothesline in Diagon Alley. Also, the clashing raptor statues at Jurassic World Velocicoaster are a subtle callback to the legendary Dueling Dragons entrance. Universal Orlando revisited the backstory of Merlinwood and Dueling Dragons in a 2023 Halloween Horror Nights haunted house called Dueling Dragons: Choose Thy Fate. The haunt attraction took guests to familiar locations like the Enchanted Oak and the Merlinwood Castle, being faced with the likes of Merlin and a darker take on the dragons, Blizzrock and Pyrock. The elaborately designed house had scenes reminiscent of the queue, with a split-path ending where guests could choose thy fate. Dueling Dragons has had a small resurgence around the parks, with Easter eggs in tribute stores, occasional new merch, and mocktails at Mythos. The dragon theming from the coaster trains were recently sold by a prop shop. Clearly, Dueling Dragons left a lasting impression on fans, and it also has influenced the modern theme park industry. Stardust Racers at Universal Epic Universe has taken the baton as Universal's premier dueling coaster. This next evolution of the ride type was manufactured by Mock Rides, launching riders 62 miles per hour in a precise yet thrilling aerial dance through the sky, like a spiritual successor to Dueling Dragons. These airtime machines stand as some of the best coasters in Orlando, but also rank among the most elite worldwide. Orlando, being known for dark rides and family-friendly thrills, has recently been on the rise as a top-tier roller coaster destination. That transformation can be traced back to breakthroughs like Dueling Dragons, which set the standard decades ago. In the time since Merlinwood was reworked as the Wizarding World, the remaining sections of the Lost Continent have lost their major attractions. Both Poseidon's Fury and the Eighth Voyage of Sindbad have closed, joining Dueling Dragons in retirement. The opening day island no longer has any attractions. Those lingering venues now sit mostly unused, while the Lost Continent has been reduced to small experiences, good scenery, as well as some dining and retail options. As of mid-2025, the island's future remains uncertain, but its legacy and the impact left by Dueling Dragons will always have a chapter in the scrolls of theme park history. Dueling Dragons soared as the perfect pairing between engineering and storytelling. It was a simple concept combining two roller coasters, but it was made possible with the brilliant complexities of innovation and creativity. No other ride captured the thrill of picking a side, or the pride of soaring into battle aboard fire and ice-breathing dragons. Fate may have caught up with the coasters, but nothing could extinguish the memories made by Dueling Dragons, a legend frozen in time. Thanks for watching. Let me know which dragon was your favorite, fire or ice? Thanks to World of Thrills for narrating the intro, and special thanks to the Storybook Amusement patrons. Shout out to the producer credits, Parallel Discover, and Nick E. Dive deeper into Storybook Amusement on social media, Patreon, storybookamusement.com, and with merch. Find all the links in the description, and check out these other videos while you're here. Thanks everyone for watching.